Welcome everybody to this meeting of the San Diego Independent Scholars. We hold monthly meetings at 1:30, usually now on Zoom during the academic year. Our speaker today is Don Norman, who is a distinguished professor emeritus of cognitive science and psychology at the University of California, San Diego. He was a co-founder and the first chair of the Cognitive Science Department, and also the founder and first director of the UCSD Design Lab. Business Week named Norman one of the world's most influential designers. And if I were to go on with the rest of his awards, it would take the whole hour. So we're going to dispense with that. Today, Don will be holding a question and answer session based on his new book, Design for a Better World. And we will be recording that lecture. But when I'm done, a little bit done in a minute here with introductions, I will start the recording, and someone please remind me to do that.
RSC, the recording is already on.
I think I paused it.
Well, Celeste can tell me all about it. I have to go sit.
I'll start it right now. Okay. No. What did I do? It is on already, Jack. Okay, thank you. You put it on. So the format that we're going to have today is a question and answer format. And for that, I have an agenda of questions that were submitted by various people who worked on some questions ahead of time. But also we welcome questions from the floor from the floor. And for that, please use the raise hand function, which you will find if you have a PC or Android, you will find at the bottom of your screen. If you have an iPad, I believe it's at the top of your screen. I see a couple people trying it to make sure it works. However, we will be following a bit of a question discussion by topic. And so I will also sort of introduce as we go on each time what the general topic will be. And so particularly if you have a question related to that topic, try to raise your hand in that period of time, or else say it's for a later topic or something like that.
Mike's down here with Tracy if you want to come say hello.
Oh, I'm going to mute all, and then I'm going to ask Don and I guess mainly Don to unmute himself. Then when you have a question, we would ask you to unmute yourself. And if you can't find the unmute button, you can hold down the shift bar while you talk, and that will unmute you also. I think that's the logistics. So my first question to Dr. Norman is the following. In your career, you have developed and refined the concept of design. What does design mean to you now? What are the primary roles of design and the design community in society?
Thank you. Design is a badly misunderstood word. In fact, it's amazing how many discussions I've had over the years for hours and hours with other designers who all hate the word design. And why? Because the everyday public seems to think that design is making attractive things, making things look pretty. And even in businesses, quite often there's a design group, but they get frustrated because they get called in after the product is already finished to make it look pretty. And that's no way to work. But design is not that. I tell people, look, design has, the field of design, there's no content in it, none. Designers don't know anything, basically, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. Because what design is, it's a method. It's a way of approaching a problem. It's a way of saying, gee, you asked me to solve this problem, but what is the real problem underlying it? You know, San Diego has had lots and lots of epidemics. Every couple of years is a big epidemic. And what do? We send in the physicians to cure the people. Well, yeah, but that's not the reason for the epidemics. Why ever do we have an epidemic? And the issue was, well, it's usually caused by bad sanitation. So we send in the public health people to explain about good sanitation. But why is there bad sanitation? Well, because the people are homeless. So the point is, to a designer, if you want to solve the epidemic problem, you have to solve the homeless problem. And so there are lots of professions with really good people who are problem solvers. We teach business people, we teach engineers to solve problems, but they almost never ask, is this the right problem? Whereas my role, when I'm a consultant to a company, I never solve the problem I'm asked to solve, because that's always the wrong problem. The first thing I do is figure out what is the real issue. So to me, this is a powerful method, and we focus upon people. We're not like other fields where they focus about cost or scheduling or all sorts of other metrics. No, it's all about people. We design for people and society. And so that's our primary emphasis. And that's why I think we can use this to any problem in the world. We've used it to organize companies. We've used it to design services and try to make the waiting in line less miserable. We've done all sorts of fields, and very few of them require artistic talent. They require, though, this problem solving focused upon the experience of people.
So one of the problems that you mentioned is the artificiality of the world. And you said, I'm going to quote here because it's easier. Because most of the things that sustain our civilization are created by people, they are artificial. Behaviors, beliefs, and cultural values are also artificial. Because our way of life is artificial, designed by people over the course of history, it can be changed by people over the course of the future. So do you want to talk about that, or would you like some more questions related to that?
Well, I'll give a start. First of all, you said this is one of the problems. No, it's not a problem. Okay. Technology has greatly enhanced basically the whole world's lives. And if I look at all of you, I see everybody has something artificial about them. For example, you're wearing clothes. Clothes are artificial. They're made by people. You're sitting in rooms with lights and the room is artificial. It's built, constructed, and the books and everything else. So I look out my window, and this is how I started the book. I look out my window right there. I'm living in a retirement community, Wesley Palms, on the south side of Mount Soledad. And so when I look out my window, and we have a private home, I see, for example, there is Mission Bay. That's artificial. It used to be a swamp. We turned it into a recreational area. I see the city of San Diego. I see the mountains of Mexico. Now, the mountains are real, but Mexico is an artificial concept, countries and the boundaries. And so, in fact, even I have a flat lawn, and we have all sorts of animals that live here. We have hummingbirds, we have hawks, hummingbirds, flycatchers. It's really amazing. And coyotes and rabbits, and it just goes on and on. And yeah, the animals are real, but this is a steep mountainside. It's how I get my exercise, walking up and down the hills. So how come it's flat? Well, it was flattened out to make it for a nice place for people to have homes. And it has streets, and I can see all sorts of power lines. And we have palm trees, hundreds of maybe 1,000 palm trees on this territory. And they're all planted, so artificially placed there. And so the animals find it a great habitat. And so they come here to this artificial habitat. Now, the way we live today is governed in the West by economic principles designed by economics who have wonderful, powerful mathematics, but who don't understand people one bit. They assume people are rational and logical. People aren't logical. Logic was invented by mathematicians and philosophers. You know, if it were natural, it wouldn't be so difficult to learn logic. People are driven by what happens in the world. They're driven by emotions. Now, emotions are good because the reason we have emotions is that we have two kinds of systems, basically. One of them is called cognition, where we try to understand the world, and that's how we try to make conscious decisions. The other one is emotions, where we put in values. Is this safe? Is this dangerous? Is this good or is this bad? And people who lose their emotions for some kind of disease or whatever, they are perfectly logical. Yes, they can reason very well, but they can almost never make a decision because they can say, oh, there are 17 different possibilities. Oh my goodness, which one do I choose? Emotions cut through that. And so you need to understand people to understand the world, and economists don't. And for some reason, first of all, they insist on measuring everything, even things that can't be measured. And when you can't measure something, you measure something else and you name it by what you want to measure. And then, of course, you usually measure in units of money, dollars or euros or whatever. And it's all crazy. And that has caused a horrible reward system in this world where we sort of aim at money as opposed to quality of life. In fact, Jesus was wrong. Jesus said, throw out the money changers. Well, he may have been right to throw out the money changers, but what he did was he attacked the symptom and not the problem. He simply said, get out of the church, get out of the religious places. And okay, they simply moved themselves someplace else. Now, money changers actually had a very valuable function because there were many different forms of money when they came into Jerusalem. You had all these different kinds of money, and the money changers changed one form of money to whatever form was being used in Jerusalem. That was good. The problem was they charged outrageous amounts of interest. And so he didn't attack that problem either. He just said, get out of my sight. So that's not a way you solve a problem in the world. You have to actually get to the fundamentals. So I don't know. That's a beginning.
Well, along that line, though, what are the fundamentals? Because you get down to what is maybe some of the innate properties of human beings, and there's a certain desire to steal things from, to get resources, to gather resources and so on. So aren't you down maybe with fighting with the real fundamentals of the human biology, if you will?
I was trying to find a book there that I would post for you. There are many problems about finding the fundamentals. And actually, a friend of mine, Arturo Escobar, he's from Colombia, but he teaches at University of North Carolina, has written this wonderful book called Designs for a Pluralverse. And what he's arguing is that there is no single answer, that different cultures have very different value systems. And so what's important for one culture maybe is quite different from what is important for other cultures. And what has happened, those of the Western world, by the way, in the fields, these kinds of fields, we talk about the North and the South and the West and the East, and they're not geographical terms. They started with the Western and the Northern, they're the same. That is and it's mostly Europe. The European countries, which then, of course, became colonialists and colonized all sorts of other countries, and who now have the European values, the Western values. So Australia, for example, is part of the global North and also the global West. Because the British especially colonized much of the world, but a lot of the European countries did that. You'll find French colonies and Dutch colonies and all over the world, Spanish, Portuguese. And what they try to do is place a uniform culture across the world, and it doesn't work. People in India, I'm fond of asking my Indian friends how much they like the fact that the British came in and said, oh, you can't run your nation. You're so dumb and stupid and unintelligent and uninformed. So we'll run it for you. Isn't that wonderful? No. But what Escobar points out is that instead of trying to have one solution, the correct solution that covers everybody in the world, why not let each group decide how they want to conduct themselves? There's only one requirement, and this was a statement that one of an early philosopher said. We want a tolerant society. We want a tolerant world. And so we can have many different groups. The only thing that we cannot have, to have a tolerant society, a tolerant world, we cannot be tolerant of those who are intolerant. Mm-hmm. So there are groups in the world who think they know truth, and therefore they want to kill the rest of us. Literally, they want to kill the rest of us. We see that going on in the Middle East right now. And no, to live together in the world, we all have to respect the beliefs of others and learn to live harmoniously. So that's a long, I give long answers, but that's a long answer to your question in the sense that there is no specific list of these are the good things and these are the bad things. Now, the United Nations has actually tried to do it. And there are some things everybody agrees on, that you ought to have enough food to live comfortably. You ought to have a basic amount of education. You ought to have basic health. And so there's a list of, they have actually 16, what they call sustainable development goals. And those are, they are trying to say these seem to be common across all cultures.
Yes, I have a question.
Oh, Alvin has a question.
I'll call my, okay. So I guess you describe the existing society as artificial. And yet one could argue that the basic underlying nature of man, not too dissimilar from those of some of the great apes at least, is such that having divisions between Group A and Group B, and therefore conflict between Group A and Group B, is part of the natural order. Another thing is that maybe Group A can be very resourceful, and of course they will create an artificial society because they will do all the things they can to enhance their quality of life, irrespective of what goes on with the rest of either other people or animals or plants or such. And so the natural order of things is not artificial, it's natural. And so the question to me is, how do you reconcile the basic nature of man? Because ultimately, it's the nature of man, I believe, at least from the evidence I've seen, that sort of shows itself in the world that we see today.
Well, yes, there are certain behaviors that are built into basically every kind of animal, different behaviors, and including humankind. But if I take a look at the comments you made about the competition or the desire to move in one direction, regardless of what it does to other people, that doesn't say, though, what happens. That's the underlying motive, the underlying causes, maybe. But what is a result is the creation of artificial laws, artificial barriers, artificial concepts. And so it doesn't destroy the notion that we have artificiality. And moreover, it can change. And we've seen that even here. Look, guess what? Women are allowed to vote in the United States. Now, it took how many hundreds of years to get that through our government, but it happened. And so there's a fundamental change that we made. It took too long, but it's fundamental. Look at the notion of gender and the notion of mixed marriages. and the notion of homosexuality. It wasn't long ago. All of us will remember. Everybody I see is old enough to remember when you couldn't even talk about that in a public place. And today it's changing very, very rapidly. It's still under big discussion and dissent, but at least it's being talked about. And then again, that wasn't possible. So it's possible to change things that the nature of gender, you might say, is innate. But look, we're now questioning it because actually biologists will tell you that biology doesn't know rigid categories. There's always, it's a continuum, and there's always things in the middle or that are ambiguous. There's another concept also that I've discovered in anthropology. It's called schistogenesis. And that means when you have two different cultures living very close to each other, they may even been the same culture, they branched off. And you'd think that, they have the same background, they have the same environment, they have the same issues, so they're going to be very similar. No, what happens is they try to differentiate themselves. So they amplify their differences until they actually can be warring with each other, and they have fundamentally different things, but it happened artificially. You might say it happened artificially for natural causes, if you want to believe that was sort of built into our human genetics. But nonetheless, they ended up with two artificially distinguishable societies that were very different. And you see that even today in politics and so on. We have people who disagree. They'll amplify their differences rather than trying to amplify what they agree about. I don't know if that satisfies you, but that's how I view it.
I see your point. The only comment I would make with regard to women, at least, from what I've been reading recently, is clear demonstration that, for example, women's roles maybe 5,000 years ago and earlier were quite different than the roles that they had 100 years ago. That is to say, women were suppressed due to the rise of certain type of civilization over a period of 5,000 to 6,000 years. And that doesn't necessarily represent women's roles earlier, which were much more equal in many ways. And it's the rise of particular social structures that led to women being suppressed and men dominating it, probably very, very close to what I would call artificiality, which I think is what you're talking about. And it's been correcting itself in some societies, but not all, at the present time.
Yeah, but so I think that's a good way of summarizing both of our points of view, because I don't think they're contradictory. I think you're talking about some underlying trends, and I'm talking about the resulting artificiality. And so, as you point out, with the role of women is in different cultures, it's very different, and it also bounces up and down. It isn't just women, it's almost any distinction, because I think we tend to be prejudiced against anybody who's different. It can be by size, it can be by gender, it could be by skin color, it could be by country of origin. We're really good at finding ways of distinguishing and discriminating. Next question.
I'd like to go on to what you propose could be the solution of the problem of, well, let me read the way actually you stated the problem that I thought was interesting. You've said it in a different way, but you said the emphasis on technology is the solution of all that ails us, but without any consideration of how people live, their lives and the ecology of the planet has led us to the age of waste. So you are talking to a large extent about an economic system that tends to throw away and so on. And your solutions for it were, first of all, to create a society that is meaningful. And so you said there, we need to measure the things people care about and understand, quality of life, not economics, at least not economics based on solely quantitative data, which is, I suspect, what you meant. But what about other things that humans want? What about status in the society? What about dominance? What about access to resource and mates? And what about the recurring trends of war? I mean, humans, every culture, everywhere seems to have war. So how is what people really care about and understand and want only quality of life?
That's a wonderful question, but it would take it would take a few books to answer it. So no, I mean, no to your last concluding question. Is all that matters quality of life? No, but I think it is fundamental. It's really the most important thing. If you take a look at money, and if you look at happiness, how happy are people as a function of how much money they have? And if you have no money, as you earn more money, you actually do your pleasure in life goes up until some reasonable point. And that is when you have enough money to be clothed, housed, eat food, etc., and do simple things in life. About at that point, it starts leveling off, and more money actually does not make people happier and does not lead to a better quality of life. And in fact, I have many friends who are billionaires, and as far as I can tell, they're less happy. The more money you have, the more worries it brings you, and the more difficulty it is. The other questions you asked relate to Alvin's issues, which are there are some fundamental issues about human behavior that really do lead to great difficulty. As you said, what about the insistence on status? Does a high status make you happier? Well, I don't know. But yeah, lots of animals have a hierarchical ranking. You know, the alpha animal versus the beta and the subsidiaries. Not all, but many, and we seem to as well. And so, we first of all, we are capable of overcoming some of these basic instincts and basic senses. But second of all, we can devise a way of working that overcomes this. I was just reading an article in today's, I can't remember whether it was the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post, because I read 3 or 4 newspapers, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the San Diego Union Tribune. So I take turns in reading them with care, but I skim them all quickly. It was about cranberry, and I forget the name of the major cranberry supplier that supplies like 2/3 of the cranberries used in the country. And it's not a company, it's a collaborative. It was set up by farmers, and the farmers now, the newspaper reporter asked one of the farmers, said, "Oh, you work for," does anybody remember the name of the company that makes most of the cranberries we buy? What is it? Julie?
Ocean Spray.
Ocean Spray.
Yes. So do you work for Ocean Spray? And the farmer said, "No, Ocean Spray works for us." And what they were saying is that all these different farmers, and they're all across the country, who make cranberries, they say they're all together, and the Ocean Spray guarantees they will buy their cranberries, and not only that, but they pay a high price for them. And then the people in Ocean Spray, which includes all the farmers, they run the place. They're trying to change the nature of the product so that cranberries aren't just used at Thanksgiving. And so they now have canned cranberries that you could do anytime, or it doesn't matter whether you want to buy canned cranberries or packaged cranberries or whatever, because it's all made by Ocean Spray. It's all sold by Ocean Spray. And it does appear to be one of those wonderful cases where there's no real CEO, there's no real governing board. It's done by the farmers. And that's the sort of thing. And this does exist in a number of companies and places. And it's really nice. My own company, by the way, the Nielsen Norman Group, Jacob, I retired from the company a number of years ago. I've retired 5 times. I'm a clear failure at retirement. Jacob Nielsen retired April 2023, a few months ago. And so we sold the company. But who do we sell it to? We sold it to the employees. There's a system called ESOP, Employee Stock-Owned Program. And so we're in the process of giving them complete control over the company. And so, yeah, they'll still be a CEO and they'll still be executives and so on, but it's the employees who will elect them. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but I'm saying that yes, there may be some things that seem to be natural, but we can, first of all, sometimes overcome them, or second of all, devise schemes of working where it's still very fruitful.
So I guess the follow-up on that would be, you talk about trying to design a society that would have these properties. So how would you design a meaningful society?
It's not going to be one person who's going to design it, nor are there going to be a single answer. Look at the ways that we govern ourselves, because, it's easy to have a company that has 10 people. It's easy to have everybody agree. You don't even need a leader. Everybody can agree. When you start to having 20 or 30 people, well, you need some control and some way of figuring out a course of action you're going to take. And my company is about 30 people. So that still makes it easy. Everybody knows everybody. And it's very collaborative. What about when a company is 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, or there are even some companies with 1 million workers? If you ask the workers to decide how they should be working, what they should be working on, it would be chaos. And in many ways, because if you ask them to be a democracy, it would be chaos. And I don't know if there's any single democracy in the world, pure democracy where everybody has equal say. The United States doesn't. The United States deliberately was set up to be a representative democracy, that we represent people, in the case of the Congress people, and they go to Washington and they decide upon the policies. So it's a smaller group that tries to agree and govern a country. And as we can see by just reading the newspapers every day, even that relatively small group can't agree. And even the small groups within the small groups can't agree. So it's very difficult. And but Winston Churchill once argued that democracy is the world's worst way of governing a country, with the exception of all the other ways, that we haven't figured out any better way yet. But in fact, in the book, I argued for what I call humanity-centered design, where instead of saying, oh my goodness, this country is starving to death, they don't understand agriculture, we'll send in the experts and show them how to do things better, or maybe healthcare, or maybe education, or public health. That happens all the time. And what happens is the countries of the world and the foreign aid programs and also the foundations, they'll get together, they'll send in the world's experts, the people will study the problem, they'll come back with this wonderful solution. It only costs 10 or 20 or $30 billion. It will only take you 10 or 20 years to do. And it always fails because experts know the field, but they don't understand the people. And as a result, they give you, they put together plans that don't work in that community. So I say, you've got to have the plans come from the community, because you have very intelligent people who understand their problems. Well, you ever go to a town hall meeting? You ever try to work with the community? It sounds wonderful. But when you try it, you get people, neighbors, fighting with each other, disagreeing. And maybe you work with them for a while and everybody agrees on something. And so then you go out and do a little bit of work and you come back to report. And guess what? Now it's a new group of people. And so they got to start all over again. So trying to make this work by having people, I think is what we must do, but it's really hard.
I'd like to ask a question, a follow-up to what Dorothy was asking. And I agree. What you said when I was, in my experience, was very true. For example, for years, experts have been coming up, and faculty members have been coming up with these mechanisms to make teachers in the elementary through K through 12 system do better job. And invariably, all these experts come up with these great things, and they try them out on this very select few group of teachers they handpicked, and it works, and it's wonderful. And then when they try to implement it in the larger audience of teachers, it fails completely because they haven't taken into account the reality of who the large body of teachers are. And that's one of the great failings of all those systems. That was my personal experience when I was running some of those programs. But in any case, the question I have is this, and I thought of this in other contexts as well. It seems to be that the world, when technology emerges, the world has no control over where the technology will lead. In other words, the technology happens, the steam engine, the radio, computers, and then the world adopts them for all the individual purposes that any human being could come up with. Oh, I can use that for this, I can use that for that, I can use that for that, and go running along doing it. And that seems to be the nature of the beast. So what happens is there's no control over the direction in which human beings as a society are going to be moving, because it's controlled to a large extent by the particular technologies that happen to burst on the scene at a given moment, and they're happening more and more often, and they're literally changing the way we live. And so it's not that human beings sat down with some design element and thought about the consequences of technology and what it's going to do and how do we control this so it happens in the best possible way. It just goes helter-skelter because all the human beings are doing what they want to do, as they often do, and go off and flying in different directions in this group and that group and the other group. So how do you handle that, and how do you solve the problem of designing in a world like that?
I never said this was going to be easy. So, but let me just start with the 3 points that I wrote down with what you said. One of them is the trying to do advances in education. I've worked in that field I've worked in dozens of fields. So almost any field I have something. I have 2 degrees in electrical engineering. I then got a degree in psychology, a PhD in psychology, but my PhD was in a field called mathematical psychology. My first job was at Harvard, where I started to learn psychology. I didn't learn it as a graduate student because I was studying the ear, and I was as an engineer, it's my home territory. And the field was called psychophysics. At Harvard, though, but when I was introduced to the faculty at Harvard, B.F. Skinner, who was the most famous psychologist of the 20th century, he stood up and denounced me in my field because I was trying to understand how people make decisions and how people think and how people remember things. And if you can't see it, you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, you won't understand it. And that was his belief. It was called behaviorism. And I'm happy to say that when he died, someone asked me to write his obituary. And I said, he was the most powerful psychologist in the United States, in the world. He set back the field more than any other individual. But the real issue is at UCSD in the very early days, I was asked to see if we could improve education. And so I was sent by the Academic Senate on a tour of around the United States, the schools that had educational groups trying to improve university teaching. And I found a few. But by the way, they were always relatively small, and they were always underappreciated, and they were always hidden. They weren't in the normal academic realm. And but I came back and I gave a report and I made some suggestions. And I said, one of the suggestions was that, nobody here, we teach K-8, K-12 people how to teach, what about learning. And there are all sorts of new methods of instruction and learning and so on that are very effective. They really are effective, Alvin, not necessarily just for special cases. I know the kind of thing you're talking about. One of my friends was guilty. He would always do studies with the elementary school students, and it get real raves, and their grades would go way up, et cetera, et cetera. And when he would try to implement it other places, it never worked. What he didn't realize is that he was the secret, not his methods. He was just brilliant with children. And yeah. Anyway, I'm trying to remember who's at the very first building at UCSD was named after one of their early first appointments, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. What was his name? The name of the hall. I can't remember his name. I dropped it. It's my age.
Not Muir Hall. Muir, Sean Muir was the environmentalist.
No, before
Ravel?
No, it was in Ravel College because that's all there was.
It was Urey Hall. It was Urey Hall. Urey Hall.
Yes, Urey Hall. Thank you. My office was in Urey Hall, and actually,
The person?
so anyway, so I gave this report, and I said one of the things we might do is we might photograph, videotape people giving courses, and then that tape would be classified, if you will. It would be reviewed only by the instructor and by an expert in education. And then you could throw it away. But because most professors have no idea what they look like or sound like. And so why don't we do that? And I gave a few other ideas. And when I was all finished, I gave the report to the academic senate. And Harold Urey stood up and he said, I don't understand what all this nonsense is about education stuff. You know, in my experience, there are just two kinds of students. There are good students and there are bad students. And that stopped the entire conversation. So yeah, it's really hard to work with people, especially people who have already well-formed beliefs. The problem in education, I can go on for hours about the problem with K-12 and the problem with university education. I'll just summarize it quickly. In K-12, the problem is there's no uniform method. We don't have a Department of Education that has any control. So we have you have the Department of Education, then you have each of the states has its own Department of Education, but then each of the communities have their own educational group, committees. And quite often the people there get elected because they say, I don't know anything about education, and therefore I know how to do it right. I don't all that highfalutin stuff that comes out of Washington, out of universities. No, nonsense. And they understand education because this is how I was taught. Well, they usually were taught badly. And university professors have no clue. They don't believe they were taught badly because they were the few who really succeeded, got through the mess. And university professors also, most professors have never worked in the real world. They've only been in universities their whole life. And even business school professors have never worked in a business. So they don't really understand the difference between wonderful ideas that get published and printed and, they get promoted, and what really works in the world. And I've argued that if I do something that saves several thousand lives, my colleagues will say, well, that's nice. If I get a paper published in Science magazine or Nature, I get promoted. And the reward systems are based on the specialties in universities. And we have so many specialists that in any given department, many people of one specialty don't have any idea what the other people in the other specialties are talking about. And the people who accomplish something have to break out of the specialists. They have to be generalists. And you do not get promoted if you're a generalist. And the reward structure, both of K-12 education and of universities, is completely wrong. It's good for building in the university. We do need specialists. They really understand topics, but we should reward generalists who put this to work in an equal fashion. And in the K-12, they're horribly underfunded and continually under criticism by people who really don't have much understanding of the educational process. So, okay, now that I've said that, how do you fix it? Well, not clear. Universities, there are a few universities that are changing. What I find interesting, the most exciting new universities I know about are all in India. And not the older universities, it's new ones, private universities starting up, because when you start from scratch, you can start doing things completely differently. Olin University in the United States is a good example of an engineering school that started from scratch, teaching very differently. They teach in projects, and they bring all the disciplines together at once. So people are really learning how to do something in the real world. And look, the world is incredibly complex. It's a very complex system. And it's not just the education and people, it's also other animals, and it's also the environment itself, all living things, not just animals, but plants, because we all support one another. We're all part of this complex system, but it's a huge system. Nobody understands it. It's got lots of feedback loops and feed-forward loops and nonlinearities and long time delays. And you don't even have to understand those words. It simply means it's really complex. And it's really hard to understand how to modify it and change things in a positive way. When the automobile was invented, as you pointed out, people just invent things because they're inventors. Hey, look at what I did. And if you ask them to think about the consequences, you can't. So when the automobile was invented, one of its features was going to be it would get rid of pollution, because the streets of the world were highly polluted. They were all covered with horse shit. And the automobile would change that, and it did. They were correct. They never imagined there'd be billions and billions of automobiles across the world, and that in order to give them roads to ride on, you had to pave a tremendous percentage of the world. And the automobiles are only used a few hours a day, so most of them sits parked most of the time, and that the exhaust to the automobile would be sufficiently enough to poison the air and really harm people all across the world. But who could have predicted that in the early 1900s? It's very difficult to predict. The same with the internet, the same with all sorts of other things. And the things I used to teach people, today I consider kind of evil. I taught people how to make people addicted to the product. Isn't that wonderful? Your sales will go up. That was considered good practice in the business schools. Today I say it's evil. As long as I'm on a rant.
John Grigori has a question.
Good. I told her she should interrupt me when I go on too long, and well done.
Don, when you are confronted with a problem to design, where do you go to for your inspirations?
What I try to do is I want to understand the problem. So the first step, this is sometimes called the double diamond. The first step is when you give me a problem, I want to sit back and say, okay, but what is the real problem? And that takes some time. It means delving down. Usually it means going to the place where the problem is and working with the people, trying to understand how they're doing their jobs or how they're living, and what are the symptoms that are really bothering them that we define as the problem. And sometimes I can't do it. In fact, if an outside foreigner comes in, they're not accepted. You're not going to learn what's really happening. So what you have to do is you have to find informants. The anthropologists are good at this, and so we call upon anthropologists to help us. But you find local informants, and you have to really befriend them, and so that could take a while. So that you're very friendly. It means drinking a lot. It means going out with them at night and drinking, and finally getting the real truth out of them, and discovering what you think the issues are. Okay, well, you finally narrow down to what you think the fundamental issues are. Now, how do you address them? And now here's a case where I argue that I try to bring in the creator people from that group, whoever is the group, I'll just call it the community that has the problem and that wishes to solve it. I want to get their ideas. Now, their ideas, they may require more technical knowledge than they have. And maybe to reach the solution requires different kinds of knowledge than they have. So I would also try to bring together people who are experts, the specialists, if you will. But the specialists, they don't design the problem. They don't design the solution. They give us the information needed to design the solution. And then the designers have very many different ways of of solving problems. It's basically brainstorming. We use one of our most powerful techniques is called Post-it notes, where everybody writes little ideas and we post them on the board and then we structure them. What's nice about a Post-it note is you can pick it up and move it someplace else. So we put them into categories and structure them. And eventually, actually, we're following somebody's wonderful Zoom. And eventually we often come up with a sensible solution, but you can't say where it comes from. It comes from this method. And one of the things we talk about is that creativity requires you to be really, happy. So when you want the creative people, you bring them in early in the morning, you play games, you give them good food, and then you start brainstorming and ideas. And we actually don't criticize. We want as many ideas as possible, including crazy ones, that we write them down on these Post-it notes. And then we sit back and we look over the Post-it notes and we try to make sense of them and cluster them and so on. And then we start structuring from there. But there's the other half of this is creative people are really bad at producing anything. And so what I like to do is after we finally said, well, okay, I think we even have a solution, we say, okay, we now have the direction we're going. We're not allowed to modify it. And we have to actually implement it. And so how long do you think it'll take to implement? Oh, 6 months. Okay. We need the answer in 4 months, I say. Because I want them to be stressed. Because when you're happy, the hormones come in and make you very sensitive to all sorts of extra things. You're distracted easily. And that's what makes it creative. You see this, oh, that gives me an idea. And they're always getting new ideas. If you're stressed, a different set of hormones comes in and you're really focused. And that's what I want people to do when they're implementing. No new ideas, thank you. When I was at Apple, my friend who was a vice president of software would never hire a PhD. So we need to get software out there and that's in people's computers and running. And the problem with PhDs is they always say, oh, there's a different way of doing it. Or maybe this is the wrong problem. He himself had a PhD, but he wouldn't hire them. It was my job. I was in charge of research, the Advanced Technology Lab. I hired the PhDs. But you know what? They would come up with these wonderful ideas and I would take them to the company and I would say, look at this. And the division would say, that's wonderful. We want to ship it as a product. Give us the code. And I would say, well, it only works in this one example I showed you. And besides, it's written in Lisp, a language you can't ship, and etc. And they say, well, have your people do it better. No, my people, they said, look, we demonstrated one case. That's it. We're off to a new problem. So
I think Jack Cumming has a question.
it's fun to work in the real world. Okay, Jack.
Well, I've been listening to you now for a while, and you're pretty much an authoritarian, aren't you? The solutions occur because you take command and bring the cohesion. Just when you mentioned about how you rep the stress, I thought of Walter Isaacson's study of Elon Musk, where he says that's Elon Musk's approach. He ups the stress, but what I hear is that you're bringing together this authority at the top that decides things, and that makes it happen. My experience from living in a continuing care retirement community, which organizes itself, at least the resident group organizes itself, is that people don't do very well at organizing themselves. Everybody wants influence, and often the mediocre people have more outgoing personalities than do the people who are really wise. And so mediocrity tends to govern, and that seems to be more the norm. We may be now experiencing that in Congress, for example. So is it your feeling that authoritarianism is a superior way of organizing human activity than is the democratic ideal that our forefathers decided was too liberal. They went for a republic. Do we need to turn to authority? Is that your position?
No, but again, life is complex. One of the best run cities or countries in the world is Singapore. In fact, I was there a couple of weeks ago. And it's an authoritative country. It's a democracy, but nonetheless, the head is really an authoritarian. And it used to be the same person and family ran it for years and years and years. And it works well for lots of reasons, one of which is because they're good. And but the problem with authoritativeness is quite often you end up with someone who's bad or evil or only after their own gain. But in Singapore, not only that, but the civil servants who actually really run the country are appointed by merit and not because they are somebody's relative. And in addition, they're paid well. They get the same salaries as high-level executives in companies. And that also reduces the temptation for corruption and graft. In Mexico, for example, the people are paid so little, they have to take bribes in order to survive. And that's not a good way to run a country. And I don't believe I'm authoritative. What I like to do is gather the people together and we try to find some agreement. But we do have rules. So that is, as I said, once we decide, we go forth and we don't change. Look, at Apple, when I first joined, I worked for John Scully, who was a CEO at the time. I was at Apple between jobs. I got there just after he was fired, and after Jobs came back, he fired me. Actually, I was the vice president. He fired all the vice presidents. It wasn't personal. But John Scully would call me in his office and say, "Don, stop everything you're doing. I have this great idea." And I'd say, "John, you said that last week, and it was a good idea." "Well, this is even better." "John, it will take 200 people 2 years to do your idea from last week. You can't change your mind all the time." But so there's where authoritative requirement is. And Steve Jobs, by the way, was famous for that. That is, when he had an idea, he listened to all the people that he respected. They could argue with him, tell him it was wrong, tell him it was stupid, give other ideas, etc. And he listened to them and appreciated it and changed his mind periodically. But once he decided which direction to go, and he did do this by himself, he decided what to do, then he said, "Okay, this is how we're going to do it, and no more discussion." So it was sort of a combination. And I like to think I'm not as strong as Steve. I can't do that. I may sound like I'm a very strong-willed, but actually I change every time somebody says something that sounds logical to me, I say, "Yeah, I guess you're right." And in my mind, so my ideas go back and forth as I'm learning about them. And I still think it's possible to do it with a collaborative method. But in the end, there does have to be somebody who says at the end, "Okay, we've been talking long enough. Let's now do something."
It sounds to a certain extent like you're getting the best success at small scale. In other words, smaller units making decisions to fit themselves. Does this mean that there's no future for large-scale organization in humanity?
Well, I think I'm a believer in small and incremental steps. And that when I say, "Oh, here's your problem in your society, and here's our solution that we're aiming to, and everybody has agreed, et cetera," you still should do a small step with a relatively small group of people. And then you evaluate whether that was in the right direction, and then do the next small step, the next. And what will happen too over time is you'll be learning from those small steps, and you'll be modifying. You may even modify the target. But what it allows this, by doing it in small incremental steps, it allows you to be more flexible. It allows you to change in the times. If a project's going to take 10 years, well, in the middle, all sorts of new technologies will emerge or new issues will emerge. And so you have to be able to respond to it. Whereas a big organization is clumsy and cannot change its way. And so I really like, actually the Italian mode is actually very, very interesting to me, where they'll have, say in the city of Modena, they'll have hundreds of companies, all relatively small, but they work together to produce things. So they have the different components of what they're trying to do come from different companies. And it's, so it's a bunch of small companies that band together into collaborative groups to do something. And it's still a little bit unwieldy because they can go off in their own direction sometimes. But that's the kind of government that I think really works well. And project management as well. The big projects just don't work. Too many people. In fact, when you get a big project, you know what the most difficult problem is? It's maintaining the communication among all of the groups. Crazy. I see a hand. John.
Yeah. What do you think artificial intelligence will do influencing designing and creativity?
Would you believe that I've actually been asked that question before? In fact, just yesterday we had a 1-hour podcast, and it was 4 people, but in the end it was only 2 of us who spoke. We dominated the whole podcast, and it would be fun to do it to this group. The other person was David Brin. David Brin is a UCSD graduate, a PhD in physics, but he's best known as a science fiction writer. And he's incredibly creative and brilliant, and he gives testimony to the Congress and to the White House's Office of Science and Technology, and et cetera, et cetera. And I've known him for many, many years. We have fun together. But yes, AI. First of all, AI to people today means, oh, this new chat GPT. Well, no, AI is everything. It's all over the place. Today, if you have a mathematical equation, say in calculus, and you type it into the computer, guess what? It will solve it for you, and that's AI. And that was one of the very early results of AI. And if you take a picture with your cell phone, it's a wonderful picture. And when the cell phones came out and there were little cameras, I said, these pictures can never be of high quality. And I said, because I'm knowledgeable, because of the laws of physics, because you have so many pixels in there, and they're so tiny that you're lucky if you get 1 photon of light on a pixel. And it's so small that you're not enough light to do a decent picture. Well, obviously I'm wrong. But a lot of the reason I'm wrong is AI, which has learned how to process the picture and combine the different pixels. And not only that, but when you take a picture, it often takes 10 pictures really fast. So fast you don't know. And if it takes 10 pictures and adds them up, that means the area is 10 times larger. And so AI has done a lot of wonderful things. When you take a camera picture and there's little rectangles around people's faces, that's AI that can do that. And now translation machines. I use Google Translate all the time. And for that matter, even just Google itself, that's AI. And so today's new AI came out of the Lindsay Norman Remmelhart lab at UCSD. We brought in a bunch of new postdocs and we were educating them, and I was giving a little lecture, and one of them said, "You're wrong." And he came up to the board and showed me why I was wrong. And I love that, because if I'm wrong, I want to know. But he and my colleague, David Remmelhart, started to invent what is today called the neural network, and what's called back propagation, which is how you set the weights. You don't have to know what that means, but it's a very difficult problem. And Jeff went on to start a major company, Jeff Hinton, and today he's called the godfather of AI. He started a company, Google bought it. He worked for Google for a while. And I asked him, how come this new AI is so powerful? What was the theoretical advance that you made? And he said, nothing. The computers of today, he said, are 1,000,000 times more powerful than when we started. But this AI today has no intelligence. It's pattern matching. It looks for common patterns. And so it starts talking. GPT means it's generative. It creates a new thing. P means it's pre-programmed. They have spent like $1 billion and a huge amount of energy I mean, enough electric energy that would power a small town for a year to train these systems, to set up the weights and the stuff that makes it work. And then T is what Jeff also invented, was what keeps the thing focused on the question that you asked, instead of just rambling off randomly. And but it has no morals. It has no sense of understanding. It doesn't know what's right or wrong. It also doesn't even know how to stick to the topic, even though it tries. And so it's really valuable for some things, but it's also not. It's not something to be feared, not yet. And I think it's going to, as with time, it's only been out a year. We don't yet know its capabilities. But I think with time, it is going to change people's jobs. It's going to make our jobs better. It's going to make us all do things better, more creative, more effective, because it has access to all the information of the world, and no single human can. And so it can answer questions, getting all sorts of information together in the answer, or draw pictures. It's getting better and better at drawing pictures and making video and so on. And but we have to learn how to use it, and it will cause people to lose jobs. Every technology ever invented has caused people to lose jobs. It often created more jobs than were lost, but the people who lost jobs were not capable of going into the new jobs. So it did create societal issues, and our society has to face those issues. And finally, we don't know how it's going to work out. My example of the automobile, who would have predicted millions and billions of automobiles? And the same with all technologies. Every single technology is used for good or bad, good and bad, both. And most of the time, it's not predictable.
Yeah.
Cummings' hand
Yeah.
is,
Okay.
and we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes now. So, Don, how
Jack
much?
had a question. Sure.
What's that?
You want to have one more question with Jack?
Oh yeah, Jack will have his question, certainly. But I said after that, we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. I was asking Don how much longer we want to go.
It's how much longer you want to go.
Well, we'll go for a while.
Well, I enjoy listening to you, and you think a lot, and you have a lot of opinions, and that's of course very interesting. And I think you can always approach, as you've noted, you can approach change with fear or hope, and that's human nature. And I think we saw yesterday an evidence that even in a company that's called Open AI, GPT, the human element comes in, and the personalities rule, and mediocrity drives out talent. And most large companies.
I don't know enough about it to know it was mediocrity. It was jealousy. It was a
my experience in big companies is mediocrity drives out talent. But I've got my minute, so let me talk for a minute, because I wanted to go back to what you were saying about teaching and learning. And in the 19th century, the great leaders were mostly self-taught, so they loved learning. And we have libraries full of books. You can go to a library and do a lot of learning. And so do you believe that the process of human progress works better with people who are motivated toward learning and passion and love of knowledge, or are teachers and the authority at the front of the room the more important element?
I'm not going to rank them. I think great teachers make a difference. But the best teacher does not lecture. They're not standing in front of the room lecturing. What they are doing is assisting people in learning. And I've always felt the best way to learn is to be given an interesting problem, a problem you think is interesting. And when I teach, I love to give my students a problem on day one, a problem they find interesting, and I do not tell them the background information they need to solve the problem. And because if you lecture and you give them all the background information you need, those are impossible lectures, because the people listening to them don't know why they're hearing it. They don't know what part is important, what part they should learn. If you give them a problem and they get stuck, or they do something wrong, and you come back and you say, oh, let me tell you something. Then that small lecture, or maybe say, read this chapter, makes good sense, and they will understand it. So learning comes about when you're ready for it. You have to get it ripe. And that's why I'm a firm believer in lifelong learning, because as you go through life, you discover, oh, I really need to understand something better. And then you do it by yourself and you really get it. Or maybe you go and take night school, or take the university extension courses, or read some books. The world's best educational institution today is YouTube. Almost any question you want, you can find some really good people answering it and demonstrating it and so on. In fact, the difficulty with YouTube, there are too many people trying to answer each question. You don't know which one to look at. But so I think that overall, our educational systems are working. I mean, I think they're flawed in many ways, but they do work. And the world, I still am optimistic that the world is in many ways getting better. And you have to be careful if you look at the world today. And of course, what newspapers love to write on is all of the difficulties and problems and the right-wing authoritative governments that are happening all over Europe, all in the United States, perhaps, in other countries, and all the ailments. But overall, even very poor people live better than kings used to live. Not the ones that are starving, but it's if you look at the life many years ago, it was not that good. We look at the good old days; they weren't so good. So I don't know. I'm more
Okay.
optimistic.
Julia, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, got it. Enjoyed your book.
Thank you.
Didn't read the whole thing, but the majority of it. And Jamie and Dorothy asked several of us to come up with some questions. And mine, I'm hoping will allow you to sort of riff on the sorts of things that you've been talking about this entire hour and a half. And that is, when I was reading your book aside, I kept visualizing Singapore, I think because I had watched a special on that. And as you were saying, it sort of epitomizes, at least visually for me, the possibilities. So here's my question. So it's 2050, and by some radical magical means, a new country has been formed, WAORCA. Washington, Oregon, and California, right? WAORCA residents, we have abandoned inefficient democracy, which you were talking about, and made you king, right, Don? Along with a cohort of design compatriots in 2025, so 2 years from now. So in 2050, and we've gotten some sort of elixir, I guess, to make us all live longer too. In 2050, you have had 25 years carte blanche, right, to redesign WAORCA, funded by unlimited Bitcoin windfall of a new, more humanity-centered group of billionaires. And you've made tremendous progress. What I would like to know is, as a visual person, if you were to zoom back in from Washington, Oregon, California, new country, onto San Diego or San Diego County, what would it look like? What would it look like? Have I too much?
I guess if I were going to be king, I would try to be a benevolent king, and
of course, we're assuming.
And the real issue is, I guess the best way I would imagine governing something, these are three states that don't agree with each other. In fact, Northern California versus.
Well, that's true, but
and
okay, make it a small, make it.
It's the agricultural parts of California versus the.
And Oregon and Washington, same split, but yeah. Well, aside from all of that.
But I don't see, in theory, you should be able to find a way of living. because they shouldn't necessarily be at odds with each other. But I do believe that all the forms of government I've ever heard about, and I've done a lot of reading, is a representative government, but where the representatives really represent. And so I wouldn't have them elected every 2 years. It sounds good, but it means that all they do is, our House of Representatives, that they spend all of their time trying to get reelected. And the same in the Senate, although that's a 6 year, so that's a little bit better. But yeah, I want experts, and I want representatives of the communities to help make the decision. And that's going to be very hard and so on. As an aside, though, one of the things I'm arguing against is in the COVID era, the issue was, do we listen to the scientists? And I said, yes, you should listen to the scientists, but you should not do what they tell you to do. You should not directly obey the scientists, because the scientists, first of all, they don't understand the real world very well. Second of all, they're giving you the best medical information. And the problem with science is that science is not a body of knowledge. It's a technique for extending your knowledge. So they gave you the very best information they knew about in the beginning, which was based on their previous history of epidemics, which turned out to be not quite right for COVID. And so they kept changing their mind as they learned things, which is the correct thing to do in science. But it meant that people no longer trusted scientists. You're always changing your mind. You tell us the opposite today of what you told us then. And so we need people, though, who can overcome that. But second of all, they would say you have to isolate yourself. That's the only way to stop the epidemic. Well, that may be true, but look at the horrible economic harm it causes. Or look at the harm it does to the young children who are isolated from their friends and from schooling. And so you need to have a panel of experts that look at all these different dimensions. And then it's a legitimate political decision. This is what politics should be about. You have these many different forces that tend to be contradictory, and you have to form a course of action. And how do you do that in a way that's going to be best for the most people, but it doesn't mean it'll be good for everybody. And ideally, you might have different kinds of solutions for different places in the country. And so in the Oregon, take the farmers, they might need a different solution than the people living in the big cities and et cetera. But it's going to be hard. But that's what I would try to do. I would try to rule by calling in expert knowledge as much as possible, but also letting people representative of the actual communities decide upon solutions. And it doesn't have to be a single solution for the whole new country, but well, you get the idea.
I do. And then once you, by the groups who are involved themselves, once you've made a decision, then you would pass it on. You would make that the decision and implement it by the experts. Now there comes the problem. There are two problems. How are you going to pay for it? And how are you going to get the communities to?
I already came up how you paid for it.
Oh, yeah. So you have somebody with a lot of money. But how do you get the communities to agree that that's what you want? And finally, how do you keep it stable? Suppose you had a wonderful group and it was really working in harmony, et cetera, for the first 5 years. You've heard some discussions about how that may break down because of the very human nature. That some people want to, maybe they're allotted a term of, 7 years. And so, but they want a second term or a third term, or they want to band together. Adam Smith wrote a lot about what is today's economic system. And when he wrote about it, he also talked about the dangers that would happen if people colluded to defeat the system. Well, those dangers have come about. So but yes, that's still the best I would come up, at least given what you gave me 2 minutes to think about it. That's the best solution I can come up with.
Thank you. That's great. It's great just to hear you riff on some of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, would you like to riff a little bit more on just your attitudes about Adam Smith and the financial system?
I don't know.
Because you talked about.
I don't have anything else.
Yeah, well, the problem with the financial system is it's profit oriented, and profit before everything else. And that's why I don't like C corps. I like B corps, which try to say that we don't owe our allegiance to only to the shareholders, which is the C corp Milton Friedman dogma, but rather B corp is we want to make things better. It's better for our customers, our employees, the community in which we live. And there are some, Patagonia is the world's champion right now. It's what everybody points about of how well they are doing. But there are other examples. There are lots of good B Corps around. But the economists measure everything, and they use mathematics, and neither of those, I think, are the right tools. And it's complex, but they don't fortunately, economics is changing. There are a bunch of psychologists who come in and try to tell them they don't understand what they're talking about when it comes to people. And economics is all about people. The first one was a good friend of mine. Three of them are friends of mine. One of them was Herb Simon. I was driving in my car a number of years ago, and I heard on the radio that Herb Simon just won the Nobel Prize in economics. And so I drove back to UCSD, and I went to my friends in the economics department, and I said, look, Herb just won the Nobel Prize. Isn't that wonderful? And they said, what a waste of the Nobel Prize. He wasn't an economist. In fact, Herb Simon could not be identified. He's one of the three people who started and named the field called artificial intelligence. He was in the psychology department and the business department and the economics department, I think, at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. He once tried to hire me to be the head of psychology at Carnegie Mellon. I didn't go. I stayed at UCSD. And he was just a polymath in everything. But he talked about the fact that people are not rational. They're limited in their capabilities. Economists assume we had access to all the information in the world, and we'd make a decision based on that information that was very logical and maximizing. And he said, no, we can't do that. Nobody could do it. So he coined a term which he called sorry, folks, but next month I'll be 88 years old. And so that little memory problem is sort of tacking on me. But basically, he said we optimize and we simply try with limited time and limited resources and limited knowledge, we sort of take something that's good enough. And the second person to win the Nobel Prize was, my good friend, and Tversky, Danny Kahneman. And Danny Kahneman worked for a long time with his partner, Amos Tversky. They were both psychologists, and I knew them both when they were graduate students, and I had just gotten my PhD. We worked together. They were brilliant. And what they did was they demonstrated all the sort of economic fallacies that just are false when you test them on real people. And then they got the Nobel Prize. Well, Amos made a bad mistake. He died, and you can't get the prize if you're dead. So Danny Kahneman got the prize. And Danny's first words were, this is really a joint prize for me and Amos. And he wrote the book Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow that some of you may know about. And the third economist was, I had his name on my mind just a minute or two ago. He wrote a book called Nudge. He was an economist. He worked at University of Chicago, and I happened to be teaching at Northwestern University at that point. He came to my office and said, I've written a design book. Could you write a blurb for me? And he wrote the book Nudge, which said, the way to have people do the right thing is don't try to convince them. It never works. Make it easier to do the right thing than the wrong thing. So when you get hired by a company and they say, we have by the way, we have a matching plan for retirement. And if you want to join it, whatever money you put in, we will match. And so that's a good thing, actually. But that's called opt-in. You have to say yes. And so people would say, I think about it. And very few people accepted it. And they said, well, look, suppose you said, we have enrolled you in this program. We're going to take some of your salary and we'll double it and put that in the retirement plan just for you. And if you don't like it, you can opt out. Well, very few people opted out. So this is a way of getting this. They had this, in theory, the same choices, but it caused more of them to do things that would 20 years later, they would be really happy they did it. And the same with good food. Make it so that in a cafeteria, the healthy food is right in front where you can get to it. And the unhealthy food, you hide, you put in the back, so it's harder to reach. And all sorts of really neat ideas. And actually, it was a joint book by this guy and a lawyer.
No, Richard Thaler is the name you want. And Richard Thaler was the name you want.
Yeah, Rich Thaler. And
it sounds very manipulative.
No, he says, he actually.
Putting healthy food in front is manipulation.
Of course it's manipulation, but he pointed out he was against manipulation. He was against being authoritative, but he said, this, at least in theory, they still have the choice of what they want to do. I'm simply making it easier for them to do the things that people decide are actually better for them. And yeah, you can we manipulate a lot. At least this is somebody trying to manipulate for the good and still leaving it open that you don't have to accept it if you really insist you don't want it. And these ideas were actually very important in the Obama administration. The second person, who was a lawyer, again, whose name I remember, was hired by the Obama government to try to implement as much of the nudge ideas as possible. And they did a lot of good stuff. But gross domestic product. It's a horrible measure of a country, and everybody knows it. All sorts of authorities that tell you how bad it is. It measures the good and the bad. If I pollute the world, when I manufacture and I spend a lot of money while manufacturing and polluting the world, that's good because I spent money. If somebody else has to come and spend a lot of money to clean up the pollution, that's good. So the pollution counts twice. And it's not a good measure of how good a country is. And there are better measures and better ways of doing it. In the book, I don't criticize in the book anything where I can't show there's someone else with a really good idea that could be implemented. But it's hard. I keep talking about the climate crisis, and the United Nations 28 years ago had a conference about the climate crisis, and they got 194 countries, all the countries that belong to the UN. They had to agree upon a resolution, which they did. And they meet every year, and they're now meeting for the 28th year. And what has happened as a result? Almost nothing. It isn't that there aren't good people and there aren't good solutions known, but it doesn't get implemented. And so there's the real problem, is how do you get this across the existing power structure, who says, well, I make all my money off of oil or off of coal burning or off of this or off of that. Why should I stop? And they're the ones who control the politicians because they have the money and they're in positions of power. So think about the senator from West Virginia.
Unmute yourself. Dorothy, you're muted.
Who is trying to talk?
Dorothy, you're muted.
Dorothy.
I've raised my hand, but I'm not sure what, just noting. Just saying.
Well, we can listen to Tom while Dorothy unmutes. Oh, Dorothy.
I'm unmute now. I was just going to say for Tom's hand, but I was also going to say we've been going on for an hour and a half, so this maybe should be the last question.
Okay, we'll let Tom have the last question.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, speaking about real world solution or getting things done, and real world solutions. This is sort of off into another area, which you've already spoken about. And you were talking about Singapore and how there was this authoritarian element. And it worked because the people were good, who were the authorities. And it's something that's really troubled me. It's almost existential in my life. This issue about, this comment about one, I forget the name of whoever it was ranking the types of political organization, and they ranked democracy the worst. For the reasons we don't have to be discussed, but this problem of, okay, that's it. What are your thoughts about this conundrum of a certain amount of authoritarian really does work sometimes, but they have to be good. And it's that but, the philosopher king. Where do you find the philosopher king, so to speak? And what do you think about that, Don? It's really troubling to me.
Well, it's actually Singapore is a different message, though. It's a small country. It's a city, a single city, a single country. It's not technically an island, I don't think, but it's basically an island. And it actually has a mixed group of people. It's people from India, from Indonesia. It has a base from Great Britain. And people from, India, Indonesia, China, where else? Malaysia. And it's very complex, but it's relatively small. And that made a big difference. And I don't think it would work as it gets bigger and bigger, because scaling it makes things very difficult. And I don't know the answer to your question. But I don't believe anybody does.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Maybe I should stop worrying about it then. Thank you, Don.
Well, yeah, I don't like to worry about problems where there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
I do worry about problems where I think I can help move us.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So I thank everybody. This has been a very nice conversation. I guess I dominated, but I was supposed to.
You're supposed to.
We thank you, Don, very much. And if you ever want to just come over and have lunch with a group of people from SDIS, I'm sure we would love to continue this conversation for a longer period of time. But I think tonight we probably should, or this afternoon.
I'm very far away. It takes me 10 or 12 minutes to get to UCSD. The real problem is you can't park, but
well, where we live, we have free parking, and you probably do where you live too. So,
what?
I said, well, I'm living in the V retirement committee.
I assumed that you were going to have the meeting at UCSD at the faculty club or something.
Well, we used to always before the pandemic, but since the pandemic, we've been meeting by Zoom, and so we meet entirely in some place. Well, we meet entirely in the ether, I guess. So anyway, thank you very much, Don, and thank you everyone for coming, for your good questions. And we'll see you all on January, the 2nd or 3rd, a Saturday of January, which is, I don't know the date right now, but that's when our next talk is. We don't have one in December because of too many conflicts. So
January 20th.
January 20 will be our next meeting. And this talk has been recorded, and it will be on the UCSD, on the SDIS YouTube site. And so if you can go to our webpage, which is sdscholars.org, and find the link to our website. We'll not link to our YouTube site. I think I'm showing a little bit of seniors moments also here, but anyway, we'll get through that.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much.
Thank all of you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, all of you.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.